It was on January 1st, 2020 that Chinese authorities shut down a wet market in Wuhan, citing it as the potential source of what would later become known as COVID-19.
We know that the virus originated in bats at some point, and then we know that human cases appeared in Wuhan in December 19. But what happened in between?
381 days later, and yep, we still don't know. Even the bat thing is really just the leading theory. So it's up to this WHO team of disease detectives, including one expert Aussie, to dig deeper.
There will be veterinarians, there will be medical doctors, there will be experts in the virus itself.
Getting them in hasn't been easy.
Today, we learned that Chinese officials have not yet finalized the necessary permissions for the team's arrival in China. I'm very disappointed with this news.
And they still have to spend a fortnight in quarantine, after which they'll have roughly 2 weeks remaining to visit hospitals, labs and wet markets to trace the roots of the pandemic.
So you look at animal health, are there antibodies? You look at the people who were first infected and laboratory studies, and you put your minds together and say, okay, what do we need to know and how are we going to find out those things?
Australia led the calls for this investigation, creating just a little bit of tension.
China has lashed out at Australia. The government accuses Beijing of breaking trade rules. Australian coal is the latest export to be blacklisted by China.
And recently, Chinese state media has been adamant the virus didn't start in China at all.
Coronavirus pandemic starts from North Italy.
But getting to the bottom of this isn't just important for our current crisis, it'll help us stop it happening again.
It's extremely important that we understand the origin of the virus, not only for scientific purposes, but also to reduce the risk of any future outbreaks.
So can this team finally uncover the answers we've all been looking for?
Jane Holton is a former chair of the WHO Executive Board and she joins us now from Canberra. Jane, just how challenging is this investigation going to be?
Evening, Peter and Girl Power. Look, it's going to be pretty challenging. This is like looking for a virus in a haystack, and it's a tiny set of changes in those viruses that have led to this pandemic that we're all suffering from. So this is not an easy exercise. The team's there to start this question and to ask the questions of all the people who are involved, but it's not easy.
Yeah, I feel like if this were a movie, we'd get to find out, but we're probably never going to know, are we?
Well, there's certainly a whole group of people I am talking to who think that's right. We think, you've already mentioned bats, there's a strong suspicion, because these sorts of viruses are pretty common in bats, that there's a link to bats in here somewhere. But if you think about it, when that happened, when this virus moved from potentially bats into human beings is quite some time ago. And trying to find out where that happened and how it happened, now, we're going to give it a red hot go, but I think we should all be realistic. It can be quite challenging to actually identify that precise moment and that precise location.
Jane, getting the team into China has taken months of diplomatic wrangling. Will that have cost investigators crucial time?
Well, I think sadly that's the case. The sooner you can go and talk to people who are around at the very beginning of these kinds of outbreaks, the greater the chance you have of potentially identifying where that leap might have occurred. Now, we all hope that the samples that the Chinese authorities have gathered over quite some period will be made available, and that potentially people who are interviewed can either be re-interviewed or that information will also be made available to the team. But I think it is the case that the longer you go with these things, to use a detective term, the trail goes a little bit cold. So there's a certain amount we can tell from the genetic work that scientists will do, looking at various viruses over a period. But in truth, combining the human intelligence, the scientific evidence, etc., the sooner you do that, the greater the chance is that you can actually find out where this actually happened.
There are concerns that the Chinese officials will have a limited willingness to help the investigators whilst they're there. Do you think this trip is going to be worth it?
Well, the leader of the expedition has already said to everybody very clearly he believes that this is a really important trip to be making, and I support him. We all know that this is a sensitive issue, and we encourage our Chinese friends, in the interest of science and actually in the interest of the whole world, its health and well-being going forward, that we all try and figure out what happened here. And I think we've already heard from some of the Chinese scientists saying that they actually welcome the opportunity to talk with this group. The woman who runs the laboratory in Wuhan, I think, is very keen to demonstrate that the work that they do was not part of this, and I welcome that. I think that's really a positive sign. But yes, I can imagine people are a little nervous about talking to these scientists, but we all encourage them and our Chinese friends to make the most of this opportunity. And even if what we do now is answer some of our questions, including figuring out what some of the questions are, that'll be a really positive thing.
It certainly will. Thanks so much for your time, Jane.
Yeah, it'd be good to see a bit of transparency, wouldn't it?
Oh,
in all of it.
To say the least, yeah. I mean, particularly after 12 months lost for the world, right?
Yeah. Well, transparency around the entire globe as well.
With so much content online, it's sometimes hard to keep up with it all. And let's face it, who has the time? The Project YouTube has you covered with the stories that matter. Hit subscribe for a daily list of the news that you need to know.